Don't lose your way. Your mind, we have to be as one.
What's going on, YouTube? Warstorm here, coming at you guys with another video today. Today I'll be talking about a couple of topics, mainly the YCS result from this weekend over in Germany. We had YCS Bochum this weekend, so we're talking a little bit about that. Then we're talking about FTKs a little bit and the whole Magician FTK issue a little bit. So YCS Bochum was this weekend, so a lot of people were interested to see what would happen after Atlanta, because we all saw what happened at Atlanta. Pele Magicians took nearly over half of the top 32 slots. And the number one thing that stood out from Bochum just at the start was that almost 2,000 people turned out for this event. So many people turned out for the event, they had to set out tables outside so people could play. It's just insane that an event can have this many people. Now granted, in Europe they don't have quite as many events as we do, so that's definitely a factor for people turning out for something like this. So, and it's been in this location several times over the past few years, so it's definitely not totally shocking, but it's a pretty high number, and it's a good indicator for where the game is going forward. It's definitely a good thing to see, you know, this many people turn out for an event, and overall I think most people were pretty cool. It's pretty cool to see kind of the whole Yu-Gi-Oh is dying narrative. I don't know how much longer the game's going to last, but definitely, you know, it's a good sign for the health of the game that I think, and it shows that the ban list did its job to kind of, and you see that with the top 32 cut. Now, World Chalice actually won the entire event, which is insane. World Chalice is a deck that we all know. It's when I first saw the deck, I'm like, okay, it's good, but it has its issues because it cannot go second in a format where there's so many hand traps prevalent, and it's just and that's always going. And the deck is so heavily fragile, and it makes such just mediocre boards. It's heavily reliant on the opponent, on not so much the opponent, but it's heavily reliant on drawing a very set specific amount of cards and resolving all the combos with very little interruption. And that's one thing where definitely, but the thing about the final was that the World Challenge played against a Magician player who was running S0, and the way I look at it, I don't really think he had a game plan outside of if his S0 play was stopped. And his list also had no hand traps, no effect failures, no ghost ogres, no anything. So that basically meant from my experience, at locals this weekend, when my opponent has absolutely zero interruption, I'm going to go ham. And that's one thing that I think that benefited. The hand traps are definitely, while they still are very prevalent, a lot of decks are slimming down on hand traps, so that's one area I think World Challenge definitely did benefit from. And a card like Venus doesn't necessarily care about Ash Blossom, which is one of the most popular hand traps right now. So it's definitely a deck, while it has its issues, and it is definitely not a bad deck, but I don't know if it's capable of continuing to play going forward. But definitely one of the cards that really was the star of the show for him, I think, was Gameciel. Gameciel is an incredible card in World Chalice because if you're playing the field spell, you can special summon Gameciel with 3,000 defense, and it can negate anything and banish it multiple times in the same turn. It's one of the things that fixes one of the problems World Chalice has, which is outside of Trigate, they don't have a ton of negation on their boards, but now you have Gameciel, you can special summon it Firewall Dragon, and the deck still functions. I mean, the deck is good deck. And then looking at the rest of the format, Magicians, I think 9 of the top 32 were just normal Magician decks, and then there were a couple of FTK variants. And the important thing to remember is the OCG does not have Link Kuriboh, or not the OCG. Europe cannot use Link Kuriboh yet because it is a jump promo. This means that the card is not. This means that the FTK is not as good over there, because it's really the fact that you can link off the Lyrilusk fusion to make Link Kuriboh really helps the comp. Because think about it, in Europe you have to make like an Underlock Taker or a Decode Talker just to get the Lyra Lusk in the graveyard. It's really awkward. It's a little bit, you have to make a couple of extra moves. So that's definitely a reason for the, and it's not necessarily meaning, but the fact is, the FTK has top 32'd in multiple YCSs over the past, so I don't really think the FTK is going to last more than, 2 more months. I think that next ban list, it is going to be killed. We saw what happened with Monarch, the Monarch Chicken Game FTK, where Upstart went to 1 and they straight up banned Chicken Game to get it out of there. I think we're going to see a very similar thing happen with the Independent Nightingale. It's probably going to get banned. I think we all know that cards is going to get banned. But the main thing is that there were so many different decks in the top cut. There were 2 Zephyr decks. There was a Gem Knight deck, which is consequently another FTK deck, which we'll get to later. It was a really diverse, there were Trickstars, there were True Dracos, there was Mech Knight Invoked, and just so many different decks, and this is honestly the perfect, it's not as diverse as, say, like, April 2014's pre-hat format, where, like, there were 9 or 10 different good decks, but it's definitely, I think this is what we want at the end of the day. We want diversity. Magicians are a good deck, but they're not heads and above everything else like Spirals, because everything else is not great, or everything else is not that good. Magicians are just slightly better. It's not like Spirals, where Spirals are a lot better and everything else is not that great. It's more like Magicians are like here and everything else is kind of trailing below. Because the main thing to remember is there is a ton of Pendulum hate. I think people went into this event prepared for that, prepared for this particular combo, and prepared for a lot of this. So the fact is, this is what good players do. They adjust, and the side decks are made plays. People make changes accordingly. So it's pretty interesting to see. I think this is kind of a more accurate representation of where Yu-Gi-Oh is right now. I think it's probably somewhere about in between. I think Magicians are probably about a quarter to 25 to 30% of the decks, the best deck, and then there's about 70% of other. And that's kind of the best thing, is that we're seeing so many, other decks running around. And that's the main thing I think at the end of the day we all want to see. But now I'm going to get to the main topic at hand, which is FTKs. FTKs are kind of been something that I think we haven't really had a consistent FTK deck or decks since Chicken Game. The Chicken Game FTK was pretty consistent, and then we got the Monarch structure deck, and it basically took the deck's consistency to a whole nother level, because now you had Erebus, you had Pantheism, you had trade-in fodder. It basically meant that you could get off the FTK very, very, very consistently. And in the OCG, I think they banned Life Equalizer, and Chicken Game is actually still legal over there, which is crazy. But Konami has decided instead, because TCG players can't really get over draw power, Chicken Game Upstart got hit. So it's interesting. So now we have actually 2 FTKs. I'm going to talk about the Gem Knights one first, and then I'm going to get to the Magician. Gem Knights have been a deck that have been around for a very, very long time. They've always had their consistency issues, but at the end of the day, the deck is still pretty. Before Master Rule 4, the Brilliant Fusion is an incredibly good card in the deck, and the deck could establish a lot of really good fusion. And Lady Lapis and Master Diamond can burn your opponent for game-ending damage before they can even get a turn. And then we got the new Gem Knight Link monster, which the deck did need. The deck was pretty much unplayable into Master Rule 4, and it's a really, really incredible card. So it takes 2 gem monsters, so you can make it with a Gem Armadillo and any other Gem Knight monster. On Link Summon, it allows you to search any Gem Knight cards. You can search the Fusion spell, which adds even more consistency to your deck. And then on top of that, it can shuffle back those banished Gem Knights to Fusion summon a monster. If you're not familiar how the FTK works, it uses Gem Knight Lady Lapis, will burn, you'll send it to the grave, and then you'll make 2 Master Diamonds that copy Lady Lapis's effect and burn your opponent for game. It is not as consistent as Magicians, and it doesn't have as many, alternative routes as like something like Plan FTK does. But it definitely is a pretty decent deck. It's managed to top 32 at YCS, but I don't think it's going to consistently hang around. The biggest issue is that, I feel like with Gem Knights, there's so many avenues to keep the FTK from going through. There's so many steps to it to stop. I feel like that, and And the thing about an FTK deck is that, like, something like Gem Knights, I cannot see it playing into a board very effectively, especially if you've got things like Dimensional Barrier, Solemns, and all these cards you can side in against the deck to not allow your opponent to go second. It's definitely something that I don't know if the deck's consistent enough to hang around, but it is a very decent deck. And the Link Monster definitely really helped the deck take the deck kind of back where it needs to be. And it's kind of cool to see, you know, any deck. But anyways, we talk about the Magician FTK. This is an FTK that's kind of interesting because it's arguably one of the more consistent ones. You're going to get it off pretty consistently. But the thing that makes Magician FTK so scary is the fact that you have other avenues of play. If the FTK doesn't seem like if you don't have all the pieces to get it off, you can still establish a pretty big board. And that's what makes it so scary, because if you're unfamiliar with how the FTK works, usually you play, most Magician lists play Dark Worm, which allows you to search out the Pendulum Gates, the Scale 0 and the Scale 13. Important thing people forget about that is if you have Scale 0 and this Infinity in the Pendulum Zone, 0 can pop itself to search a fusion spell. So typically, either through Electromite or through multiple Dark Worm searches, you search them both out, put them in your Pendulum Zone, pop them off, and that searches out the Instant Fusion. Then your Instant Fusion activated to summon the Lyrilusk Independent Nightingale from your extra deck, and you link it off with into something like Link Karibo or whatever, and then you can make multiple Supreme King Starving Venoms. Both of them will target the Lyrilusk. Because they are level 8, Lyrilusk has an effect to burn equal to its level. You burn the opponent 4,000 twice per game. It's not exactly a fair thing, and the FTK has been known for a very, very long time, almost since Starving Venom's release. But I feel like until Electromite, there weren't a whole lot of consistent ways to pull it off. And it's definitely an FTK that is scary in multiple ways, because not only is it consistent, it's able to be pulled off. You know, it has other avenues of play. It's not like Plan FTK where you have multiple ways to get to your win condition. It has multiple ways to still beat you, even though it doesn't go through. Even if you stop the burn damage by the Starving Venom, your opponent can still, you know, overlay the 2 Starving Venoms for Hope Harbinger. They can still make something else next to it. So that's what makes the deck so dang scary, is that it can make multiple plays. Now, unlike Gem Knight FTK, this is an FTK that's consistent, and it can still do other things. So something has to go. We can talk about Starving Venom, we can talk about Instant Fusion. Instant Fusion's like a whole nother debate, because the card, I think it's fine, but it's always this card that kind of keeps creeping back in and creating problems. And in this case, I just feel like you should ban the Lyrilusk Fusion. Just ban it, because Tyrant Neptune already got the ban hammer before we got this card. You're not using it for anything else. And honestly, I feel like this whole thing about all these old cards like this, that, you know, I think of cards like Phyrexian Cluster, Amaryllis, Toon Cannon Soldier, Amazonas Archer, all these old cards that literally have no other use other than to be used in FTK decks. Honestly, I would just place all of them on the ban list. Just ban them all, because they don't have a purpose. They don't have a use for any semi-useful thing other than being used for FTKs. I think, honestly, that is the solution. I don't think Magicians really need other hits. I think Electromite is the card that's going to eventually probably go to 1, but again, we are megatons away from that happening. So, to kind of just summarize, I think Magician FTKs are something that aren't really fun to play against, and but nevertheless, Konami gives us these cards. Konami gives us the options. We figure these things out. It's up to them to figure out how to prevent them and fix them after seeing that these things happen. So anyway, guys, that comes to the end of the video. Did you guys think of the results over at YCS Bochum, and let me know what you guys think about my thoughts on FTKs. Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, I thank you guys for watching. This is Orstorm, signing out.